Hello, Josephine of the future here, or Josephine now, as in Josephine in the future in relationship to the podcast you're about to hear, because it has just taken me this long to edit it. My sincere apologies because it's really good and should have heard it by now, so it's a good thing you're getting it now, is what I'm hoping you will believe and you will forgive me dearly. The main thing is that a few things have changed. Things that we talk about coming up soon are obviously now out, including wonderful works by the guest of our fabulous episode this time, CN Lester, and of course my own book, which I talk about in the future tense, but actually is out now. So there you go. That's how time works, apparently. And also we forgot to mention some of our pronouns. That's she, her for me, they, them for CN Lester, and Jay will also tell us that it's they, them for them. Hello and welcome once again to It Is Complicated, the podcast where we answer every single question with It Is Complicated, including the title of the podcast, which is also It Is Complicated. Hello, Dr. J, and hello, CN Lester.
Hey.
It's Dr. CN Lester as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm really holding back from being like, it's complicated, but it's not complicated. It's just Dr. Lester. But thank you.
I'm so sorry. I didn't know you didn't. It wasn't aware of your title. I feel like I've
No, it's all good. I think it's one of those we discussed briefly this idea of talking about sort of queer people in portfolio careers, and I think it's one of those portfolio career things. It's like, at which point do you say, "Oh, I'm a doctor"? You know, obviously not the useful medical kind, the weird, musical kind. It's always a strange one to think. Sort of, when do you bring out sort of the big guns in terms of titles? When don't you?
I bring them out all the time. I just swap my title out there from the start.
I am an aspiring doctor at the moment, so we'll see if one day I actually manage to get the 2 letters at the front of my name. And who knows when I'll deploy it, if at all. But still, I feel like I'm very excited to have you here. Then Dr. Lester or CN, whichever way you prefer.
Yeah, it's great.
Would you like to introduce yourself, or would you like one of us to do that for you?
God, this is always, my brain stalls at this point. I guess I'm a musician. I'm a multi-genre musician, so I do, everything from like super early music to improvise to singer-songwriter stuff to once doing like weird backing vocals in a commercial session, which ended up being used on Lord of the Rings trailers, and then another one for like Susan Boyle's Christmas album, because being a jobbing musician is weird, and doing commercial backing vocals, like you don't even know what you're doing till you get in the booth. And then I work as an author, fiction and nonfiction. I'm a researcher, and I am an activist for sort of trans, feminist, queer, human rights style things.
So just a few things then.
Yeah, just a few things.
We were talking before we started about how queer people tend to have a million jobs all at once, especially if you're creative. And what a wonderful and impressive portfolio, as you used. I love that word.
Talking to a friend of mine, actually, another musician, earlier on today, and I'm sure we can talk about this at length, but I think there's so many interesting things to be said about portfolio careers and economic necessity and being queer and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I think it's more and more normal that you just have to keep like 5 plates spinning.
That's true in my case, definitely. Dr. J, is that true in your case?
I have the privilege or the advantage, or whatever we want to call it, of being gainfully salaried employed at the moment. And I have been almost for the last 7 years, which is a shockingly long length of time for me to remain in a job and for me to not have like 10 other things on. I think it's now reduced down to, because I do this and I do my day job, and I now have a show on Trans Radio UK, and I'm working on the photography archive, and I'm trying to write a book proposal, which I will eventually manage to get out. And I do a whole pile of talks around diversity and taking diversity. No, I don't do anything, and I don't have a portfolio career at all, and I have no plans. And my retirement plans are literally to keep doing all the same, although probably get a non-executive directorship on a Fortune 500 company, because why not aim high? Go for the moon.
I have no idea what those words mean, but they sound very impressive. Dr. J, would you like to introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce my portfolio career as well. We can compare.
So, hey, I'm Dr. J. I use they as a pronoun. I work at ThoughtWorks, which is a bespoke software consultancy, and they allowed me to write my own job titles. So I gave myself the job title Harbinger of Change, because when you can, why not be fabulous? And then the New Zealand government gave me the possibility of writing my own gender. So thanks to them, I got to write a statutory declaration saying I'm transgressive, non-binary, genderqueer, and I have been since 2007 or 8, I think I put on the form. And that is what I would like to state on your forms. Thank you very much. I'm a troublemaker, as if you couldn't guess, and a hashtag queer nuisance, because I went to one queer lecture. I've actually been to 2 queer lectures now, but I went to one queer lecture by Sarah Ahmed, where she talked about how being queer changes the space by just being queer within that space, and introduced the idea of queer nuisance. And I decided I would take that on as branding, and I have.
Have you seen that Sarah Ahmad has a new book out, Feminist Killjoy? You could be a killjoy too if you want.
I don't want to be a kill. Do I look like a killjoy? I am the most enthusiastic person about anything and everything always.
You're gonna love, no, I trust me, like you are gonna love the Feminist Killjoy Handbook. Like it is a killjoy in a way that I think will speak to your soul.
Ooh. Although I look at my reading pile, which contains 2 CN Lester books, all of Travis's work, because I've read some of it once, but I want to reread it. And it is now a double layer of a reading pile. I do not need to add anything more to the reading pile right now. Please stop writing. Please stop writing fabulous queer stuff, people.
So unfortunately, I've been threatening Jay with my novel that I'm writing at the moment. I was saying to Jay, like, hey, you know what? It's in the second draft. It's getting better. I can send it anytime you like. It's got pictures.
Ooh.
Yes, it does actually. Yes, because I'm not busy enough.
So, Josephine, are you going to introduce yourself?
All right. Okay. I'll try to introduce myself. Here we go. Hi, my name is Josephine Baird. I'm an academic at the moment who is studying trans experience in relationship to video games. I also teach. I'm a lecturer at the University of Uppsala, where I am teaching on video game design. In my other life, I am now once again a performer. I wasn't for a very long time, but for some reason I seem to be getting performance gigs at the moment. So feel free to welcome me to perform at your event. It's been conferences recently, so in front of academics, which has been very interesting stand-up to do. I also have many, many other jobs. And because I'm not busy enough doing a PhD and a full-time lecturer, I decided to write a novel recently. That novel will eventually be coming out. It's being illustrated by the wonderful Suzanne Shiflett, who's an amazing artist, and will be available eventually online as both a text and audiobook format, because it's accessible, and also we thought it'd be funny. And I like to think of myself as a femme of international mystery. Because why not? Because Jay gets a hashtag. I want one too. That's us. Hello, dear listener. It's very, very pleasant to be with you once again. This is sort of part of our Voices series, which is we really like to, and we've been incredibly lucky to have with us some of our favorite people to express themselves, share their voices, share what they want to talk about. Some of the topics we talked about before coming on today. Is there anyone in particular you want to start with? Are we talking about being portfolio people? Are we talking about something else?
I think portfolio people sounds really interesting, because I think I'm in that conversation. I'm now the weirdo in that, being a salaried, long-term employed person, but also being able to talk about the difference that that's made after so many years of running a portfolio kind of career, but now also continuing to run a portfolio career around a day job.
I'm just trying to think of a friend just now. I was trying to think of my friends. Who are the people I know who don't do 3 or 4 or 5 different things? Partly out of necessity, whether financially or just in terms of opportunity, or a combination of the two, obviously, and also just to keep ourselves feeling positive, productive in the face of so much awfulness, to express oneself. For me, one of the reasons I was doing so many different things was to be able to express in different ways things that I didn't really feel like I had a consistent language for in one site. So academia provided some of what I wanted to say, performance provided some of what I wanted to say. When I started to draw, that was another outlet. Gave me an opportunity to share things that were harder to define textually. And now with a novel, it's weirdly, it's about looking back at history and expressing an entirely different way. So maybe that's part of it. For me, it certainly is, but it's also been about necessity, for goodness sakes. There's definitely been occasions when my job has been extremely precarious. So
even taking the queerness out of it, if you can. I did not have to go and be a freelancer. I was lucky enough to have a family supportive enough that when I said I want to be a musician, that was actually a possibility. So, there's already a huge degree of privilege already. And, for me, and I think for a lot of other creative people, like clearly, both of you as well, you can't put a firm dividing line between different avenues of creativity. You can't say, oh, I'll go and do this music, but I'll stop thinking of lyrics, or I'll, if I'm writing this thing, I'll just make sure that no music pops into my head. Or if I'm researching this thing, I'll make sure that it stays strictly in a non-fiction zone, and I'll definitely not think of any characters that, that's not how brains work, that's not how minds work. And if you then are lucky enough to be able to pursue that career, I mean, there are just so few avenues now where you can have one job in the creative, field. We're literally in a situation, BBC singers, I don't know if you've been following it, but they just got the axe, one of the few jobs in classical music in the UK where you actually had a regular income, where you could, have a mortgage and think about raising a family, and just gone in an instant, overnight. And, certainly in the music world, there were some careers where you could think of, having a long-term contract, and they're just gone. It's that casualization and that sense that you're just on very, very small little contracts that pick up is everywhere. So, and I think, then within that, the more the more deviations you are away from quote unquote the norm, the less likely you are to get one of those very, very few positions where you do have stability. So again, it is what it is. I don't think for my generation and younger, I mean, I just don't know anyone working in the arts that has that level of stability, unless they are super privileged, super lucky, and usually a tenor, and even the tenors I know most of them don't have job security. So, what are you going to do?
Oh, I realized you said tenor, not tenor. And I was like, they're a tenor. And I'm like, why are they a 10 quid note?
No, the old-fashioned prejudice in music communities that tenors tend to get slightly easier ride than other voice types, but they don't always. There you are. I'm trying to be fair.
You sparked a memory from 2008, I think it was, when I was doing my first run around at being an academic. And on that occasion, I was trying to do a PhD, had a full-time personal assistant job because I needed to pay my own way. And I was doing the performance thing because that was my outlet. And I remember it was right at one of these horrific crashes in the market. And there was this conversation amongst the PhD students in our little gender institute. And they were all looking ashen-faced one day when I walked in, because all of the funding had been cut for the academy. And they were like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And I was feeling so awfully sorry for them, but I was like, publish anyway? Like, just get your stuff out there, be speaking, go some other route. And they looked at me like I was absolutely out of my mind. And then I realized, okay, no, of course, you've got a single track. You always had. That this wasn't their fault necessarily. It was just, that's the way they'd always thought. And because I hadn't ever thought that way, because I'd never had that security, it was like, okay, well, I'll just figure another way. I mean, yeah, it sucks. It's really precarious, but
Even in tech, there is something similar as well. Coming from a very different world, but there's been times when I've been freelancing where it's always been just luck of the draw as to how it's gone. And I still can't believe that ThoughtWorks employed me. I still occasionally wake up and go, I can't believe that I'm employed and salaried and have a position that is stable enough that I've been in the same position for 7 years. And that is just, I was going to say batshit or insane, but it's not. It's something that all of my peers in their 50s have had, most of their lives have had this steady, stable income. The fact that I've finally had it in a job where I'm not trying to self-destruct. I'm not constantly fighting to be seen as queer or seen as who I am, and not just seen, respected for it, promoted for it, like encouraged. You know, my work encourages me to write posts about my experience and what tech can do better. They encourage me to do talks, or they will forge spaces for me to push into and just get me an interview talking about how to get young minority people into tech. With, it's called Code First Girls, but they work with a lot of minority genders as well. And it's kind of one of those branding things of, they branded 10, 15 years ago and didn't really know a lot of people from outside of the gender binary, or there wasn't that notion of it that was in the technology industry at the time. So they've got these really cool programs, but they've not kind of adapted their branding. And I got interviewed by them. I get to talk about what it's like to be so different within tech. And it is that thing of, if you're not norm, if you're not the cis white straight man who's middle-aged, who grew up middle class, who was born in this country, who went to the right school, who went to the right university, who's neuronormative, you know, who's not slightly neurospicy, all of those things, has good mental health, it has no mobility issues, has no caring responsibilities. If you're not that person, your chances of being employed drop with every single interview you do. Every time you go up for a job, your chance of being employed is so much less. And especially when you're miles away from norm and you're very much an outlier, your chance of picking up even the small freelance contracts becomes much, much lower. And it's only, and people want you for a specialized piece of what you know. So you get the short-term gig, but it never grows into the big proper gigs that everyone talks about, which is very similar to the arts industry. And it's the same gig economy problem repeated and repeated and repeated of, if you're not norm, you're not going to get the full-time positions. And by not having the full-time positions, you've got to run the portfolio career. You've got to be doing 6 or 7 things. So when you turn up for an interview and they look at this mess of a CV and they're like, well, what on earth do you want to do with your life? And it's like, I want to eat. Please, sir, I would like some food on my table and I would like to heat my house. I am living in the apocalypse that is 2023.
I think I've told this story before. I was around the same time as that crash, weirdly enough, 2007-8 as well. I just moved to Sweden, and my first official job in Sweden was performing in an opera, which was really wild because I don't sing in that way. In fact, when I sing, it's interesting. I like to think it has character, but that doesn't mean it's in tune or even necessarily matching the rhythms of the music in a way that isn't my own. But I was invited to be in this opera by a fabulous director who, when I had the meeting with her, you know, very rarely as an actor do you actually admit to the fact that you can't do something. It's that old adage of like, you know, if they say, if you can ride a horse, you say, of course I can. In this particular instance, I didn't think I could really get away with it. I said to the director, I'm really sorry, I've never been in an opera per se. Tried to dance around the idea. And she said, oh no, that's okay, because I've never directed an opera before. So that was exciting. And so we both sort of went, all right, fine. But in the salary negotiations, because there was one, which is very exciting as well. I'm not used to that. As a performer, I'm used to, if you're lucky, a $5 and maybe a slap on the ass as you go out the door to the night bus. That's kind of what I was used to. But there was an opera house, and the lovely person who does this rang me up and said, so normally in these situations, we pay you according to the training you've had. And I was like, okay. And he said, have you had any? And it was like, as a dancer, not really actually even that. That was just dance classes I used to go to. And so she had me rattle off all the things that I could do. And so I was like, well, I can rollerblade. I was a dancer. I was a gymnast for a while. I can play the drums. I know a few different languages. I can curl my tongue into, what could I do? I could roll my stomach. And so in the end, they were like, okay, well, that sounds like an awful lot. So we'll put you in a higher bracket because of skills. And I went, sure, I'll take it. But they were just not used to this notion of someone just coming in and not having gone through. Well, surely you would have gone to a conservatory. Surely you would have gone and had classical training because that's what we're used to.
I mean, to be fair, a lot of the opera houses, particularly the European opera houses, work on a very, very strict. Yeah, exactly. We're all nodding our heads. So yeah, I think there is.
Yeah, they had no idea what to do with me.
No, I am not surprised. Oh God.
I was cast. Well, this is a little bit ego thing. It was very exciting for me. I was cast as a character in this operetta, and then after a while, I think they just didn't know what to do with me. So they said, no, we're giving you a different character. And I was like, oh, I'm sort of sad. I kind of like the character. And they said, yeah, we've written a new character for you. And I was like, oh, that's very exciting. And I said, what's the character's name? And they were like, Josephine. Because they couldn't think of anything. I shit you not. They were like, we just kind of got used to you. So just you.
Oh.
And I'm like, I'm flattered, and also I don't know what to do with that. So yeah.
Introduce me to this amazing person who is like, tell me your skills and I will up your pay depending on the number of skills you have. That sounds
I was very, very lucky because honestly, I lived off that money for like 3 years because after that I didn't get another job for a while. I was unemployed, but because the money was really good for that particular job and because the opera went on for a really long time, which is quite unusual, I was able to just hoard all the money because that's what I, like a lot of people in our situations, you get paid, you start, squirreling away the money for the time when you won't be paid anymore, because that's definitely what happened. I mean, there's not a lot of jobs for a trans actor who hasn't gone through classical training. Is kind of a bit weird. As much as that has its advantages, the disadvantage, of course, is you don't fit into a box. So you don't get booked, you don't get hired, not in the same way. For me, it's always been a question of queer parkouring through all of the institutions, getting in here and sneaking in there and just maneuvering into that and the other.
That phrase is amazing. Queer parkouring, that needs to be some kind of. We started with hashtags. That needs to be a hashtag. That's a gorgeous.
Thank you. I used it in an article a couple of years ago when I was trying to talk about how we had to navigate 2 countries' different legal systems in order to have our daughter. It was absolutely wild. But yeah, I know. I found it to be useful to describe something I think so many of us know. I know a little bit about your career, and I imagine I know significantly less about how you've come to the situation you're in, but I imagine it's not dissimilar in some ways. Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of, I think as a teenager, I was very naive and definitely bought in to the whole idea that music is definitely a meritocracy. And, if you just are so good, then everything will be fine. And if people hate you, you just be so good. And then they won't hate you. They'll be like, oh, my prejudice has fallen away because you were so good. So, I had a rough time at school and, talked about this before, the bullying extended, it wasn't just my peers, it was teachers as well. And, all that fun Section 28 time, I definitely had this imaginary concept that I would get to university and I'd read music, which I was reading music, and I would just, I loved Carson McCullers, and Carson McCullers had published, The Heart of Lonely Hunter when she was 21. So I was like, great. So I've already written 2 novels. I will write another novel and I'll be published by the time I'm 21, just like Carson McCullers, and I will play in an amazing rock band and I will get signed just like Michael Stipe, and I will also be the world's best pianist and best composer and best singer, and everyone will know how great I am and everything will be gravy. And like, that's not what happened. So I found undergraduate very, very difficult. And had a lot of problems with physical impairment and terrible mental health issues. I'm very open about. I had a mental breakdown when I was 13, and I'm using Dr. J's phrase, it's been spicy mental health times for quite a while, but, very lucky that at the age of 20, I found a great therapist and the right meds, and, it's gotten easier over the years, which is a huge benefit to aging we don't talk enough about. So yeah, and then my brother was diagnosed with brain cancer while I was doing my undergrad, and it was all kinds of terrible. So trying to finish up when I had lots of caring responsibilities and, got my degree, left university, became a full-time carer for my brother after he died. I was trying to get jobs, trying to get back in, and couldn't get anything, again, thinking of that, I was really pleased, Dr. J, when you talked about sort of caring responsibilities. I remember one interview I went to maybe 3 months after my brother died, and it was for a classical music organization, and it was to, go and be their musical admin. And they looked at my CV and they said, well, there's this gap on your CV. I said, yes, I was caring for my brother who just died of brain cancer. And they said, oh, but the thing is, though, how can we know that if another member of your family got ill, you wouldn't just quit your job and go and care for them? Like, that makes you quite unreliable. So that was fun. And I wasn't getting anywhere. And I was like, fuck it, I'm going to go keep training musically. So I went to my master's and also started working at the same time, doing opera chorus work and sort of picking up little gigs as a training musician and all the rest of it. And, I guess through the years, just kept up with my music training, never got to conservatoire, have had, not a great time in the classical music industry from sort of queerphobia and transphobia. That's changing now slowly, which is really good. Working as a singer-songwriter, that industry again wasn't fabulous. Some people were better, but I think it can shock people how a supposedly quote unquote cool industry can still be full of arseholes. And I started blogging and I started making sort of DIY albums. And I, was introduced to this amazing queer trans feminist fan base who supported that. I was putting music out, teaching music to pay the bills, writing. And I was incredibly lucky that, while I was putting all this stuff out on my own, my second album got a really great review from a reviewer called Laura McDougall, who then approached a friend. Turned out that she was a reviewer in her spare time and she was a literary agent in her non-spare time, and went through a friend and said, does CN have a literary agent? And the friend said, no, they don't. And Laura approached me and said, well, what are you writing? And along with all the other things, I sort of said, well, I blog a lot about trans rights. And Laura read the blog. She was like, you got to turn this into a book. You got to write a book based on this. So I did, and she sold it, and that became Trans Like Me. And that was first published in the UK in 2017 and then worldwide in 2018. And that was a big turning point for me. In terms of actually getting some institutional support, getting a mainstream publisher, it's published through Hachette, getting to tour with that, getting the audiobook out, all this kind of thing. And I then started a PhD. That was in 2015. So I was working sort of full time while doing my PhD. And, I think Dr. J knows me from way back and, gave me some incredible career advice and career mentoring very early. And I think a lot of what they said was, you find your people and, you got to keep banging on the door. So I still run a trans arts night called Transpose, which is now, I founded it in 2011. It's going into its 5th edition now at the Barbican. And I can just say ACE, Arts Council England funding was successful. So it's going to be the biggest one this year. It's an international collaboration now with a Turkish trans collective. Thank you. It's really, really exciting. But, your advice was just to keep banging on doors until someone opens. So I cold called theatres throughout London and stayed on the phone until someone put me through, and eventually someone put me through to the head of theatre at Barbican. I wouldn't get off the fucking phone. And I went with the ballsy move of, you don't have enough trans artists, you don't have any trans artists, I can change that for you. And she went, right, let's have a meeting. It's been a lot of scraping around and a lot of, again, you bang on the door and you bang on the door, and then you see if you can find a window, and then you put your foot in the door, and it's that kind of thing. So I think things are changing and improving, and I'm very aware that I've had an easier time than sort of artists who've been earlier than me. You know, I've had emails from people sort of saying, you know, you're out of the closet. You know, I'm a musician who was never able to come out. I was never able to transition. So I feel I've rabbited your ear off. I don't even know if I'm answering the question that you initially asked. But
It's
yeah, and
wonderful. No, really, please, I've been enthralled. You're not rabbiting at all. It's really, really interesting. Thank
I
you.
also love the way that you described that, and you've said I've had an easier run, and I'm just sitting there like, it's got the same level of, I mean, we all have, seems to be a queer level of employment horror story through different ages. Like, because I'm now in my 50s and I get to say that I'm quite proud of being old, because being old gives me gravitas or something. But also there's that insane employment of like, you talked about some stuff, you said, and I did this and I did this. Oh, and I was doing my PhD, and I was like, when did you start your PhD? And I started in 2015, and realizing that you were doing a PhD while doing all of this incredible stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I was doing that too. I ran a lab in New Zealand for environmental virology while finishing off my PhD, and then quit the job because of bullying, and walked into a call center and did night shift work in a call center, and then worked in the lab during the day, and had one day that started at 11 o'clock one night and finished work at 7 p.m. the next night when I got home from work. And I would just curl up in bed and sleep for 8 hours. And I was living with my parents at the time for a bit, and my dad would just wake me up and feed me occasionally, because he knew just what a horrendous day that was. But there was no chance of me making that day any easier. I literally had to work 18 to 20 hours plus 2-hour-long drives in the middle of it across Auckland. And you're just like, why did you do that? And I'm like, living.
Because you had to, and that's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, easier or not, the thing is, you did this intense thing. See, and from my perspective, same thing goes. It's like you're saying it's easier, and I'm like, I don't know. It sounds pretty intense to me. It's like, but it's also a story I really recognize. For me, 20 years ago, I was doing this. So the performance I just did over the last couple of days, partly was about being called an elder. And the joke I said was like, well, I was called an elder the other day. And by other day, I mean 10 years ago. It's like, I was called an elder 10 years ago. And at the time I was like, oof, I don't know how I feel about that. And then it was like, no, actually, the people I thought of like that were my age when I was coming up. So yeah, actually. And then also, I was thinking back at the performance career that I had was very much like that. It was when I finished my bachelor's degree, and I was very lucky to be able to go to university. It's how I kind of escaped and was able to be in the position I was in. I did my master's degree in gender studies, which was also only possible because I was right at the cusp of that thing before you had to start paying for your education in England, before student loans were a thing. I was really, really lucky. But at the end of the master's degree, I had no idea what I was going to do. And I kind of got into this really odd situation where I was a dancer at the time, and with just enough experience and just enough notoriety to have gotten auditions at like the Laban Center, and they'd accepted me. I had a part-time job at the time at Stonewall, of all places. It was really wild. Where I came out as trans. That's a story. And then at the same time, my gender department had encouraged me to study for a PhD. And 6 months before that, I'd been completely, I was unemployed 6 months before that. So I was in this really wild situation of like these three options, which all sounded amazing. I didn't choose the dance school because I just knew that as a trans woman, it was going to be really, really tough.
Yeah.
And I didn't choose to stay at Stonewall as much as I liked it, because I knew that eventually there was going to be a ceiling to that. And I'm very glad I didn't stick around, because when the management changed, they wouldn't have liked me very much anymore. I went to do the PhD because I knew that I could do the other two things, be an activist and be an artist at the same time. And that's what I was doing. But it was wild because I had 3 full-time jobs. I was at a job for money, the PhD, and an acting job. And I was hammering away at all 3. And as much as I did get a modicum of success in all 3, I was really lucky. I managed to get to do the opera, and I had a few film projects and a few other things as an actor. And as a PhD student, well, I crashed and burned, but I'm trying again, But the reason I burnt out and the reason I struggled as much as I did was because I was working so damn hard. So as much as it may sound like an easy path, what you just described to me is a path that I really recognize and was very hard on me, to the point where I'm now trying to do not a dissimilar thing. Obviously, I haven't learned my lesson. I've got a job. I'm doing my PhD. I'm trying to write a novel. I'm performing now and again because why not? I draw a picture now and again as well because whatever. So,
And you do this.
and I do this with you, Jay, and I'm trying right now to remember to do that with some modicum of self-care.
Absolutely. And I think it's difficult. I think trying to find the right words, and I struggle here. I think I'm very much aware that I've not had an easy ride compared to a lot of people that I know working in music industry, but I'm also aware of just how much easier it is than a lot of people who've been pushed out, who never even had the chance to start it. And I think I'm very cognizant of the fact the world is just not easy. And I've talked about this sort of before, but my grandmother now is 93 years old, and she and my Abba, her husband, my grandfather, I was the first grandchild and really close to them. And I think of my Abba, when his father died when he was 14, and he just now suddenly had to take care of his two siblings and his mother, and there was nobody else, and there was no national health service, there was no benefit system, there was just him working at the steelworks in South Wales, trying to make enough money to keep his family alive. And compared to that, I've had a very easy ride, compared to my Nana, who is and was a very, very gifted musician, but that just wasn't on the cards for her, again, growing up in a steelworking factory in South Wales in the middle of the Second World War, not a time to dream of being a concert pianist. And I remember very vividly the point at which, she gave me a huge hug and she said, "You're living my dreams for me." But, it just wasn't on the cards. And, there she was, keeping a family together, 4 children, no washing machine, no, no modern appliances, just, wash day with the tub and the mangle and all the cloth nappies to wash. And so I think I try to stay cognizant of the fact that, yes, I want a better world. I want a universal basic income. I think we all need better than this, but also I have had a gift to be able to pursue this career in the arts that even, 2 generations back in my own family would have been absolutely impossible. And it's still impossible for a lot of people today. So, and again, sort of thinking about opening those doors, I just think that thing where we keep that door open and we broaden the door and we take a fucking, crowbar to the door frame. Transpose, every year I do transpose, and every year I think, oh God, this is the last time I'm going to do it, because I get so worried about, what if I won't get the funding in, and what if I let everybody down, and, what if it all goes wrong, and, last year, what if everyone gets COVID and then the audience get, all the worries. But at the same point, the sheer fucking joy of being able to pay trans artists who are great and enjoy their work, and it's amazing, and get to share that work with, hundreds of people in the theatre, thousands of people online, and actually feel part of that same ecosystem that's benefited me, thinking of Dr. J being so generous and supportive of me, and thinking that I can pay that forward a little bit. It's, again, self-care, absolutely vital, because God knows that took me a while to learn not to work all through the night. And there was definitely a distinct, at one point when I was, I'm very lucky now, I only have to teach students that I really enjoy for my bread and butter money. And, particularly with the pandemic, it means mostly online and with people who are really motivated. When I was in my 20s, typical young music teacher, you're just teaching people's kids. And it's middle class and wealthy parents who see you as a glorified babysitter, who they can leave standing in the rain and they can forget to pay you and all this kind of stuff. And just an awful lot of dinners that were cold sandwiches, sitting on buses in South London, and then coming home and staying up till 3 a.m. composing, and just being like, sugar is a substitute for sleep. Coffee is a substitute for sleep. And going in for my day job and, having to go home once, I think I drank 11 coffees and was sick and had to go home, all that fun stuff.
There's so much recognition. It's wild.
Absolutely.
hygiene now. Like I was an insomniac from when I was a tiny little baby, and then as a mad teenager, I was sleeping 2 hours a night, and then just falling asleep in classrooms and standing up and all the rest of it. My sleep hygiene now is on point. That is, I work so hard on my sleep. I want people to praise me, but yeah, just that the boring daily self-care of, did you sleep? Are you washed? Did you have nutrients in your dinner? So
I've had to do this myself. In fact, I've been flat out instructed by institutionally appointed carers to do these things. Don't tell anybody. I'm just telling everyone. I want to praise Jay as well, because Jay has done this for me too.
Yeah.
Yes, you have. Little audio description for the audience. Jay's looking surprised and perhaps a little pink. Jay is one of the most generous people I know, in that they have supported many queer people, myself included, in times of dire straits, and is one of the people who demonstrates what you can do with opportunities that you've been able to create for yourself, opportunities you've had. We've often talked about advantages, privileges, opportunities. Yes, maybe we have it easier sometimes. I know I've had it easier because I was lucky enough to be able to get an education. It's the reason I'm here. It's the reason I'm able to do the things I'm doing now. It's the reason I was able to be an artist, and the reason I'm now in this environment. Jay exemplifies to me what you can do with the opportunities you have. And I wanted to say that because I know you won't say it, Jay. Because, you don't, because that's the kind of person you are. This idea of like, you've had an advantage, you've had it easier in some respects, but you know enough to use that for the benefit of others. And I really admire that in you. And it's been of direct benefit to me.
I now don't know what to say. When CN was talking about their grandparents and that I was the first of my generation, I was the first of my father's generation to finish high school, of my father's family, the first person to finish the first part of schooling. Neither my mother nor my father finished high school. Their parents before them barely finished primary school. So actually having an education and the choices that that gives you is so huge. And the choices that it gave me in terms of how I could live my life, in terms of being able to understand that what I was non-binary, or this transgressive non-binary genderqueer mess that you see before you. But this whole notion of being able to understand who you are and to be in a space where you're allowed to be that. One of the things that I talk about at work that shocks a lot of people, because I have a colleague who's in his mid-60s and he lives up north, and he's recognized that through some unfortunate events in the last 2 years, he's realized that he's reaching that life expectancy edge. So there's a lot of people who are in his peer group who he's suddenly turning around and he's finding himself starting to go to a lot of funerals because his peer group are all within that range. And then I said to him, I'm already over that for my peer group. My peer group, most of the people who were non-binary, who were born like me, won't have made it to this point. And that is such a shocker when you start to think about it, because I'm only 10 and a bit years older than Josephine. I don't know how much older I am than CN, probably a lot more, a lot more than that. But it is kind of one of those shocking things of, you look at the number of trans and non-binary people who are that 50 plus age group. And yes, there are becoming more of us, but there aren't that many. I don't have that many people to look up to. I don't have that many people who are like me around. I know more people who've committed suicide or have died of things that were self-harm gone wrong, or have just those things, more than I know of people who are my peers. I know that we said that we're going to keep this happy, and I have wandered off down a very dark corridor, but I think it is one of those things that you become very aware of, and you become, I don't even know what to say. And I think that drives a big part of our constant need to be producing and doing and being visible, because all three of us are really visible, and we could not be. We could do our shit and not be visible. We could do our shit and kind of either be read as a bit more normative or go a little bit more into something that's not quite so putting yourself out there on stage or in talking things or in performancey things as who we are. We could have gotten away with it, but we didn't. We made a choice to be more visibly ourselves. Yeah, I don't know where that's going.
Please
I
don't.
rambled.
You didn't.
Beyond all the internet memes and jokes, I do get very, very angry when people use the term elder for people who are not, in fact, old. And I'm not, I think, I understand the need to say this person could be a mentor to me. They could be a possibility model to me. There could be someone that I could lean on. I'm still in my 30s, and someone called me an elder. It's like, fuck off. Please do not erase the fact that yes, there are trans people actually in their 80s and 70s and 60s and sometimes their 90s, but we're missing most of them. Don't erase the fact that we're missing most of them. That is not right. And don't make it this weird ecosystem where somehow like the normative age for a trans person is 21 and everyone else is not. It feels like it's lacking in intergenerational, and again, I think of, the intergenerational community of trans people that saved me and taught me and inspired me and been friends and colleagues and just lovely people to hang out, eating cookies with. And I don't want to get at people who maybe have seen so little of that they can't see otherwise, but I actually think it's quite an important point not just to settle for that framing. I don't think it's healthy for any of us, actually. And I think there you are. I'm trying to think of any other good points, but yes. And
it's a really good point. I think you put that extremely well. It was very odd when someone said that to me, and it was when I was in my 30s. And I found it very discomforting. And not because it made me feel old. I was like, well, okay, yes, it occurred to me that, well, maybe to you I am. And when I was coming out, and I came out very young for my peer group, like there just weren't people coming out at my age when I came out as trans. And it was very, very difficult to find people my own age. So I did look up to people in their 30s. And yeah, to me, they were my quote unquote elders because that's who they were. But I agree entirely. There are definitely people who are in those positions now that I would think of perhaps that way if they would like to self-apply that term. But yeah, it's just been very strange to consider that. And because I performed about that this last weekend as well. And because the other thing that happened very recently, which was related, I found out that some of if you're into queer archives, as in archives of queer experience, most of them at the moment that are popping up are collections of what they call ephemera. So stuff that's kind of around that isn't necessarily considered traditional historical artifacts. In this case, it'd be flyers and posters, oral histories, tapes, CDs, video content, that kind of stuff. And I found out that some of mine is in an archive. And it was really weird that, like, okay, there's stuff about you in this archive of queer history. And I was like, am I ephemera now? And it's like, so I asked the question, am I really elder and am I really ephemeral? Because I don't feel either of those things are true. But the fact that we think of 20 years history as ancient is kind of scary. But also at the same time, I see why. I understand that 2003 was 20 years ago. And for some people, that really is a generation of complete generational shift. So yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. Absolutely. And I agree.
You're both my retirement plan, by the way, because my my photography archive from like 2006, 2005, 6 onwards of all of the queer performance that happened in London and internationally is sitting there waiting for me to sort it into something where I can hand it to somewhere like Bishopsgate and get it published and talked about and written about, because I have terabytes of photos. And, you know, I discovered one of them was used on a poster in the Barbican, and I'm like, ah!
You've taken some of the best pictures of me anyone's ever taken. Oh, that's something I could talk about for ages, is like the difference having like a queer photographer taking your picture makes is night and day. Like, yeah.
Please do, if you wouldn't mind. I'd love to hear about that.
It's what someone sees. And I find it so fascinating with cameras, the uninitiated idea that a camera is true to life. And of course, it's true so much to the photographer's eye. And one of the reasons it's been such a joy to be photographed by Jay is that, you know, you make me look handsome, and you
are.
Well, I try my best, but it, you know, with some photographers, particularly I think ones who are, I'm trying not to get my picture taken by straight cis guys because they always try and make me look soft. It's very odd. You know, it's so odd seeing how a face can change. And then suddenly I get like a queer photographer and it's like all cheekbones and jawline. You're like, oh, I like that. That's good. You know, do that one again. And then, yeah. But, you know, and then the thing as a singer, obviously, where people take pictures like up your chin and up your nose, and then they wonder why you don't like the photo. You're like, no one needs to see that much nose hair.
Especially when when you're on a performance on a stage and they take the photo directly up your nose.
Oh,
no.
but it's just bad sightlines. You choose a sightline that, okay, yeah, maybe I'm more of an artist than I thought.
Oh yeah, I think you really are.
Yeah, because I was about to sell my Jay photographing me story, because A, I love Jay's photographs of me. B, Jay took the time to help me learn how to be photographed. Do you remember this, Jay?
Possibly. I'm going to nod because my memory at the moment, time is a thing that I don't understand.
Very early in my career, I was ruining photo shoots for performances. And the thing was, when we were very early in our little collective career, we had our little troupe of queer career artists. And getting any time with a photographer of any kind, even if it was somebody volunteering, was really precious. It was really hard to get a studio space. It was really hard to get somebody to do it. And so photo shoots were really quick. You had to be on point. And I couldn't do it. I just would stand up there, and I'll try to visually describe this, dear listener. This teethy grin, big eyes, looking really awkward, not really knowing what to do. So one day I said to Jay, please, because you were a photographer at this point, I said, Jay, please, dear God, what do I do? And you took me, and we did a series of photo shoots. And it was, I think, 2 days in the end. I think it was one really full day and then a second day. And you just helped me learn how to relax and be photographed through the queer gaze, through your lens. And since then, I've been able to take pictures, but only because we actually sat down and did it. Because before that, it just wasn't happening.
I do remember taking those photos, though, because there's the one that you referred to as your album cover, which was the first time that you took off your top in front of me. And I can understand why you were so absolutely nervous, because it could have changed the entirety of how I saw you, because in the past it had for people. And it's the same way as when people find out I still have a stupidly gendered middle name, and I'm eventually going to take it and kill it with fire. Hopefully sometime this year I get to change my birth certificate in New Zealand, which then gets me a non-binary identity on my birth certificate and a new middle name. But when people get a very gendered version of your name, for whatever reason they pick up, they ask you for a previous name or something, because sometimes the checks that I go through, they have to ask all of my previous names, and they see a very gendered name, it instantly changes how people read you and see you and what they understand about you. And they will then ask different questions of me in my gender journey type questions and things like that. And that whole thing of performance changes your life. I was saying, whether you're performing or receptive of a performance, every single performance changes something about how you see the world. You will receive something, you will take it in, and it will change and transform how you see the world, how you see yourself, how you see something fitting in it. That's one of the reasons why I am like I won't say a junkie for performance, but I spent a lot of money at the vaults in the last couple of months. But I do really, really love going to live performance because there is always something about that interaction between the person on stage and the people in the audience, and how that conversation happens. But it's not a conversation in the normal sense of talky receptive. It's very, very much a conversation that happens all the time.
I knew that as a performer, and I don't think I knew just how much on a bodily level rather than just an intellectual level until the first gig I played since the pandemic started was in the summer of 2020, and I got booked to do the Pride gig for the Arts Club. And because it was still locked down, but with exceptions for work, I went, and it was me and one sound engineer and one interviewer in an empty room. And, they were masked and I was performing with 3 cameras on me. And I didn't know, when was I going to rallentando? I couldn't tell because there was no audience, and I couldn't feel from them by their breathing and by the noises they were making and by their eye contact and by whether, because if you perform a lot, you'll notice when you make them cry, that's the gold standard. You get the tears going, you're like, I've got them, everyone's on the same page now. And you know when to hold, you know when to pause, you know when to breathe, you know when to get louder, and nothing. There's blinking 3 cameras, and I thought, oh fuck. And that it's so transformative, not just being in the audience, being on the stage is completely transformative. And I think it's very easy to fall into thinking it's just that, oh, love me, I didn't get enough love in my childhood, please, which it's definitely a part of that, like, let's not lie. But I think more than that, it's a very shared animal connection. When everyone there is breathing together, when you're feeling that energy passing backwards and forwards and through the room, it's like nothing else in this world.
Yeah, I really recognize that. It's funny because this reflects something of the conversation we had with Dr. Joe Pazza recently in one of our previous episodes, when we were talking about breath and why breathing together can be so cathartic and special, especially in queer environments and performance spaces. But I definitely recognize what you're saying, CN. I on the very few occasions when I've tried to record performances, it's been very, very difficult to do that without an audience. And thankfully, when I've done recordings like that, it's usually been a film crew who are queer, and that is enough of an audience. But still, even then, it's very difficult to try and reproduce something that you might have done in front of a live audience.
It's hard to bring that electricity in there.
Even giving a talk. So I won't say I have a speaking career because that implies a career, but I give talks on stuff around bringing diversity into tech, and most of them I end up having to give virtually. So I'm performing to this camera and this laptop with this headset on, or my slightly lighter weight headset, and you don't feel the same as when you're standing up on a stage. You don't, even as a not very good performance speaker, you don't know how something is landing. You don't know whether you need to dive into that and riff slightly for another half a slide, or you stick to the script and you go on to the next thing because you've not got that feedback from the audience. I mean, I had to record a TED talk. Hi, welcome. Thank you for coming to my TED talk. I got to do a TED talk. It was a lockdown TED talk. And that was so hard to do because it was right at the start of lockdown. Now I've done it enough times, I can put a teddy bear there and perform to the teddy bear and really push it a lot more. And I see some of the interviews that I've done or some of the recordings, and I'm like, you are so throwing a lot more performance than you normally, a lot more hand gestures and that than you normally would, but you're just having to go almost into silent movie territory to make sure that the message is landing because you've got no feedback. And I haven't done a talk to a queer audience for so long, and I would love to, because I think it would be so different to do a conversation with. Actually, no, I lie. I did that panel at MB City that we put out as the 3 special episodes, where it was to a queer audience, and it did change how you ran the conversation, because there were some riffs where people were like, leaning forward, and you're like, I shall continue along this thread because this room is interested in it. Whereas often if I start down that riff, you kind of see people going, I don't get this, or this is too far for me to understand what it is. Or you've sworn once too many times and I consider you now not to be professional. Because I've started on my rant of, if they don't, actually, this is my big rant to try and attempt to pull this together. Or one of my things of the week is, if you're not in a job where they respect you and want all of you, fuck them. They just don't deserve you. Now, that is something you can say as somebody in a very privileged or hugely advantaged filled position. I can say that, but it is one of those things that we have constantly had to fight to be in a room where people only want a tiny quarter of us. They want the this part, but not the this, or this. Or if you could be, oh, we love you being this, but could you be a little less queer? We love you being gay, and we want the gay, but we don't want the rest of the LGBTQ papa in there because it's too confusing to us. So could we just identify you as lesbian, because queer is a pejorative term? And I'm just like, I want to be employed. Yes, of course you can. I want to take home some money and I need to eat. So of course you can call me lesbian and introduce me in a way that's super reductive, because there is no other way for me to navigate this environment right now. And yeah, I just say, fuck them. They don't deserve us. They don't deserve how awesome we are. And we need to start demanding better. But we can't, because we be poor.
It sounds like we're wrapping up a little bit. And for me, very quickly, I would say I've had the pleasure and the luck and the opportunity to have performed in front of queer audiences very recently for the first time in 6 years. I think we calculated it out. The last time I performed in front of a queer, no, actually, sorry, it was about 3 or 4, because I was able to perform at a Pride the summer before lockdown. But it was magical to be able to perform in front of a queer audience again. And it's something I wasn't expecting to be able to do again. I must admit, for those of you who listen to this podcast regularly, you will have heard my original introduction was very much, I used to be a performer. And now I'm performing again. And it's not something I expected to do. I didn't expect that as part of my portfolio career again. But it was such a very, very special experience that I will be seeking it out again, to include that into my portfolio career.
Amazing.
So, yes, if we feel that we've covered everything that we'd like to talk about, we could move on to something that we do every week, dear listener, or every time we finish a
Every
podcast.
episode.
Every episode. We don't do it every week anymore because I don't have the time to edit every week. Sorry. So every episode, we try to finish that episode with discussing what we might consider next time. And every time we consider that the next episode might be the episode where we talk about how breathtaking Keanu Reeves is. So what do you think, Jay? CN, any thoughts on Keanu Reeves and why we should consider how breathtaking he is?
It feels like the queer community in general is due for a big rewatch of My Own Private Idaho. You know, as a little queer teen, I knew that was a movie I needed to watch, and, got hold of a copy and did my best to absorb its lessons. And I feel, young Keanu Reeves and River Phoenix in a very sad film is a very important thing that everyone needs to watch right now, frankly.
I also really like kind of running the narrative of Keanu, of the character that he plays is almost from Bill and Ted's. It's like the downside of Bill and Ted, and that's what the character went off to be. And you can just kind of continue that arc a lot of the way through some of his movies of kind of, he either went off to do that or went off to do Point Break with Patrick Swayze. And you can kind of build that whole narrative of Keanu's characters also having that having that same life. The historical one, of course, is the Vicomte de Valmont. It is Valmont, isn't it? The incredibly dorky and ever so Californian young French nobleman.
Oh no, you're going to start my whole thing about John Malkovich, though, which I have an unholy love for John Malkovich. So just.
Oh, good, because that film is brilliant in so many ways.
But yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's and Glenn Close. Oh,
that movie. Oh my God. Okay, I need to rewatch that.
Yeah.
For purposes.
Yeah. Dracula, on the other hand.
Oh, let's not talk about Dracula. That exists. That's good. That's fine.
They have those two vampires right at the beginning who are women, and they're just together, and I always fantasize about them. And it's the only part of that movie I care about.
Oh, and the soundtrack, Annie Lennox's song in there. She sings over a cello. I can't remember what it's called. Love Song. It's something like Love Song to a Vampire or something like that. And it's just such a gorgeous melding of her. Okay, I am tone deaf, which I think I've mentioned before. So her sounds and the cello sounds make nice things inside my head.
Fair enough.
Fully into this.
See, this is why Keanu Reeves is breathtaking, because not only is he breathtaking in movies in which he is very, very good, quote unquote, he's also brings out elements in movies where he's not as excellent as we might like him to be. For some reason, like for example, Point Break has Tori, what's her name? The actor, the sort of not quite butch love interest in Point Break, who I had a thing for.
She's in Orange is the New Black as well. Are we talking about the same one?
I know.
Excuse me while I Google.
Please do.
Anyway, so yes, Keanu Reeves happens to have this particular skill to introduce me to other actors who I then have special feelings about, like in the John Wick movies, where the wonderful adjudicator who we were talking about just before we came on air, everyone, who I also have special feelings for.
Is it Laurie Petty?
Laurie Petty.
Oh yeah, Laurie Petty.
Yeah, who was Tank Girl. Yeah. I mean, the fact you didn't say who was this and was Tank Girl. I mean, seriously.
Sorry.
I also feel we need a Tank Girl rewatch. That feels very on the money right now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
What, the apocalyptic future of Mad Max Fury Road? I know that it's problematic in some ways, but I just also watched Atomic Blonde.
I have not seen Atomic Blonde.
Oh, you so have to. Charlize Theron is almost like a female Keanu Reeves in this. But one of the best things, I was watching a Stuntman React, I think it's called, talking about some of the fights that she did. And one of the things that she did was ensure that the character, everything was done based on her physicality. Like, she's only so tall, she's only so strong, so she has to hit somebody 5 or 6 times to take them down, not just once. So there's a lot of that from the stunt people. But also, by the end of the film, she looks like she spent 3 days physically being beaten up. You know, you can see her and you can see the pain that you can see the bruising, and that is really unusual. And I think John Wick is the only other one where I've seen that, of somebody physically looking like they've been through a fist fight, and they're not just kind of walking away with, oh, I've got a bit of blood on my lip, and the next scene they're completely fine. No, she's walking in with a ginormous black eye and a split lip, and all of her knuckles are raw, and she's had to take them. It's just, such a good movie.
Also very gay.
Oh yes, much gay. All of the gay.
Now you're just making me think of The Old Guard and wondering when we can.
Oh my God!
Because I think it's going to be fairly soon, right?
Yes.
Is there another one?
Yes, they're doing another one.
How do I not know this?
I don't know what to tell you, Jay. Is your finger far away from the pulse of these particular kinds of movies?
Have I not watched? Oh no, I was going to say I've actually started to turn the TV back on. I spent about 3 weeks not being able to handle the TV or videos or anything like that. I could do maybe half an hour, and then I'd just was too much. So I was spending the evening listening to music and reading books, although it has barely dented the reading pile.
Well, I think we've covered not only why Keanu Reeves might be breathtaking, but why several people who we admire might be breathtaking. And I think we all have some movies that we all want to watch and or rewatch. And dear listener, do consider watching them with us. And if you'd like to tell us about them, feel free to get in touch with us through social medias. If you're also interested, you are very welcome to come to our Patreon, patreon.com/itiscomplicated, all one word, where any of the money you so generously share with us goes to paying for our guests to come on, because we think everybody who is providing their work and labor should be paid for such things, and you make that possible. And whether or not you feel like you can join us there, please do consider joining us next time on It Is Complicated, which is free wherever podcasts are sold.
You can find us wherever good podcasts are sold.
Thank you.
And I have discovered that if you leave us a review or a rating, more people will get to find out about us. Although, given that all of the other It Is Complicated, because I didn't realize it was such a popular name for a podcast, we now not outcompete them. We are now at number 50 something of episodes, and a lot of the other ones are at 5 to 7, which means that we now appear at the top of the list because Apple rates that longevity and that productivity. But if you'd like to give us a rating, more people will find out about us as well. Hopefully, maybe, I don't know. It would be nice.
All right. On that sort of diminutive note where you sort of like undercut yourself, can I please say thank you very much to CN Lester for joining us. I highly encourage checking out their music, and very recently released short story, I want to say, in Furies, which is the collection of stories that has just come out.
Yeah.
Please do check that out. I'm very excited. I haven't been able to read it yet, but I'm very much looking forward to it. And thank you, and please join us next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.